is the portion of Vayigash in Genesis, which begins with chapter 44. And to read the first verse, it says, Vayigash elav Yehuda, and Yehuda came close, Vayoma bi Adoni, and he said, "Oh my Lord, Yedabena Abdecha Dava Baznei Adoni." I pray, I want to say something in the ears of my Lord. Va'al Abcha Ba'avdecha, and let there not be any anger against your servant, meaning himself, Yehuda. Ki chamocha kefaro, because you are as Paro. Now, because we have not had an opportunity to discuss the past two weekly portions, namely Vayeshev and Miketz, so it's almost like we're coming right into the middle of the film, and not having an overview of what's really taking place, because there are several questions that have to be raised on the overall story of Yosef, Joseph, and Yaakov. We're talking here and dealing with chariots. Now, when you're dealing with chariots, the idea of chariots, which I have once before discussed, but just again to give you somewhat of an insight into what chariot means, it's the idea of a physical individual who somehow, by a robotic consciousness, meaning it was not something that he developed, it is not something that he acquired during the lifetime, it is not something that he has acquired or through experience that has brought him to this level, this phase of chariot. Because chariot means an individual who is very much physical, like Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, the three upper chariots, very much physical, and yet they are called the links to these energy intelligences called Sfirot, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet. Now these three, we'll be discussing these three in particular, Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferet. These three cosmic energy intelligences, or bottled up energies, are the real forces in our universe. Now, I'm not going to again discuss the futility of man in attempting to rule and master his universe, because I think we just have to look at history and take into account the 2,000 years of history. It's quite evident that man is certainly not in any control of his environment, and let alone, of course, and more importantly, his own life. He has no control. There are environmental factors, as some might like to place the blame, or national problems, etc. We know that is not true. We know that man can. That means when I say man, I'm not talking about man collectively. I'm talking about each and every single one of us that can master this universe, meaning we can be aloof, we can be divorced, we can be totally separated from our environment, while we may at the same time exist in that environment. This is Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. They too were chariots, meaning they were very physical, yet they had this total connection to these energy intelligences, which today are referred to as these things, the unobservable things I'm moving now. The atoms, which consists and participates in every physical, including our bodies, and take up 99%. The same atoms that are in my body are in everybody else's body. This is the energy. We understand that today. That energy, those three forces called proton, electron, and neutron, are only derivatives or even emanations and evolutions of what? Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferet. That's all they represent. Therefore, when we discuss Hesed, Gvura, and Tiferet, we are discussing these three energy intelligences, which are not bound up by a table, but which control and master this universe. Avraham, being the chariot, being this merkav, being this link between the physical realm and this metaphysical realm. You know, atoms here are metaphysical. If they were physical, my hand couldn't flow freely. Like if I wanted to push my hand through the table, I can't no longer, because those atoms now are within a physical realm, and here they are not contained. They are without limitation. How can we connect with this kind of a force? Avraham had total access. Yitzchak, total access. Yaakov, total access to the three independent sfirot. So this is what we mean by chariots. These were physical people who could connect with the forces that control this universe. It's not man, obviously, and there is some other force. Those force or forces are called sfirot. If that being the case, then the first question we have to raise in the story of Jacob and Joseph and his 11 other sons is, how could they even entertain selling their brother? Because again, most of you already are familiar with the significance of Jacob's 12 sons. They represented the chariots of the constellations, the signs of the zodiac. That's why there were specifically 12 sons, not 11 and not 14, but 12, to indicate to us that these 12 sons now made it possible for every single individual to somehow link with those powerful energies, tap that awesome energy for our own benefit. They made that contact, and because they had once established the contact, since there is no disappearance in spirituality, that contact that was once established remains forever an establishment, and that we and every single individual can now tap it. If that is the case, then how and what happened in the tale of the Bible when it discusses in Parshat Vayeshev, chapter 37, that the brothers hated Joseph, and because they hated him, ultimately this hatred brought to a disaster, meaning not only the sale of Joseph, but according to the Talmud and according to the Zohar, it brought all of Israel into exile within Egypt. That was the single factor that brought about this bondage that we discuss on Passover, and which the entire significance of Passover is bound up with. This is what our own kind, Jews themselves, brothers themselves, perpetrated. A cardinal sin to sell your own brother. And then in Miketz, we have the story of Joseph becoming appointed second to Pharaoh. And then came the hunger, and I won't go into the narrations of the Torah, because again, from the point of view of the Zohar, if we are to treat these stories as narratives and tales, then we ought to be considered fools. In fact, the Rabbi Shimon always remarks that he had someone near him who could even write better narratives and tales than those that we find in the Torah. Therefore, it is only a fool who considers these tales on the basis of its superficial nature. There in Parshat Miketz, the preceding Parsha, we have the discussion of Joseph becoming second in command, the hunger coming, and then there being no food in Canaan, which was then Israel. Jacob sends his 10 sons to purchase food in Egypt. Jacob recognizes them, and a story develops. He sends him back home, keeps a story, which I don't even want to go into, because from a superficial point of view, there is very little meaning. But then I want to raise the question that didn't Joseph know that his father, Jacob, was in deep mourning and suffering from the day that he disappeared? And that was almost 17 years ago. So you might say when Joseph was in jail for 2 years, we can understand that. But the next 7 years, or the moment he became second in command to Pharaoh, why didn't he inform his father that he was alive? His father was suffering. We're told so in the Torah. We don't even have to be told that he was suffering, because it specifically states, because the Zohar raises the question, how come Jacob, being a chariot, being totally connected with cosmic consciousness, and you know what cosmic consciousness means, that plane where tomorrow, today, and yesterday is all one, that Jacob could not see that Joseph was alive, and that he went through the pain and suffering of thinking and assuming that Joseph was dead. And Joseph continues and persists in this concealment of his, permitting his father to continue the suffering. And this goes on, and then with Benjamin and so forth. And then we come to this week's portion, where now Yehuda comes to speak to Joseph, because he was locked up in prison. He's coming to plead on behalf of his brothers. And Joseph continues this kind of act, pretending he doesn't know them, bringing more suffering. Was it revenge? We might say that is what Joseph had in mind. However, there are two concepts that would absolutely oppose that kind of thinking. First of all, Joseph, after the situation of the wife of Potiphar, where she attempted to seduce him, and he resisted, he put up the restriction necessary to bring about a new name for Joseph, Yosef HaTzadik, Joseph the Righteous. Now here is Joseph the Righteous, who is continuing this kind of despicable, I might say, if we read according to what the Torah says, behavior towards his brothers, towards his father, and therefore we could never entertain, or the Zohar cannot entertain, the fact that Joseph could possibly have been seeking revenge because his brothers had sold him. So what does all this mean? Since we're going to be discussing many of the aspects of the Zohar pertaining to the various questions we raised, so as to open up some of the hidden consciousness, I don't have to convince you. I think our psychiatrists have done a good job in telling us that we make use of 5% of our potential, 8% of our potential, but by and large we're asleep. In other words, 92% of ourselves are asleep. So they tell us. And I, for one, do not disagree. And so to open up some of the channels, some of our potential, some of the hidden potential, we have been told by the Zohar, by Rabbi Isaac Luria, that by virtue of the reading, just the reading of the Zohar, the reading of Rabbi Isaac Luria's works, you're making connections immediately. I'm not stating here to what extent. That will depend on the individual. But merely by reading the words without even understanding one word of the Aramaic, one has immediately made a connection to either you might refer to as cosmic consciousness or that level of subconsciousness. That level of the 92% of us. Now, you might consider that illusionary. For me, 92% represents more than 8. So I kind of like to feel I'd want to be more connected with 92% than when someone says, but you're not being rational. Because I'm not operating my 8%. And in fact, those who study Kabbalah are constantly reminded to remain rational. And what are they trying to tell us? Stick with the 8%. Well, I, for one, refuse to be satisfied with 8%, and I'm going to make every effort to connect to that level which is beyond the 8%. And therefore, we know that Sephardim in particular, maybe not today because they're highly rational people, but at one time they were very illogical, irrational people, and they would simply read the Zohar without even necessarily understanding what the Zohar was about. And that brought to them the greatest period in Jewish history since the destruction of the temple, because they were irrational people, illogical people, because they dealt with the realm of 92%, and that still produced that beautiful period called Spain, the golden age of Spain. So I would kind of like to follow in their footsteps and maybe also acquire that consciousness beyond the 8%. And therefore we will always be reading the Aramaic. We begin every lecture, whether it's in the Aramaic, in the Zohar, or within the writings of the Ari. But because we are merely reading these words, as the Sephardic Jew many, many years ago would just sit every morning and read it. Whether he understood it or not was not important. In fact, today, for some of you who have listened to some of the tapes, if a computer in a supermarket can pick up a bottle of soda, which has, those markings, if you can just pass me that, this, he just reads this, and you know what happens? He knows what the price is. He knows what's being sold. You see? Just by scanning this, that brainy computer, shall we say, possibly more intelligent than the human being, which I personally do not subscribe to. But if that little can produce a price on somewhere in a computer merely by something scanning it, I also believe that by scanning these words, we're opening up a complete new channel of information. So we will begin first by reading the Zohar to permit all of us now to understand what the Zohar is going to teach us in reference to the questions we have raised and many other ideas, that we can understand it beyond the level of the consciousness, the so-called rationale physical reality. Vayigash elav Yehuda, Rabbi Lazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, patach, ki ata avinu ki Avram lo yadanu v'Yisrael lo yakirenu. Ata Hashem Avinu Goalenu Me'olam Shemecha. This is a verse in Isaiah chapter 63. Haikra ukmu. This verse has already been discussed elsewhere. Aval tachazi. Come and see. Kadbara kucha berichu alma. When the Creator created the entire universe, Kol yoma v'yoma avid avidata kedachazi. Every day he performed his particular function. We know what days mean. We're not discussing days in terms of the physical reality as we know it, 24 hours, but we are talking about day one, meaning the power of Hesed, that energy intelligence that was created. Day two, which is Gevurah, etc., etc. Each day he performed and created each individual energy intelligence, every sphira, as it should be. Bekol yoma v'yoma kamada itzrich. And each day was infused with that amount of energy that was necessary. Keven da'ata yoma shetita. But when it came to the creation of the sixth day, v'istarech limivra Adam, and now came the time to create Adam, atat araita kamei, the Torah came before the Creator. The Torah came before the Creator. You know what the Torah is. That's the thing that you read sometimes on Shabbat, and when you can discuss and chat with your friends, the most appropriate time. That Torah that we so neglect in the synagogue today came before the Creator. It walked up. Usually we walk up to the Torah. Here the Torah did a double and walked over to the Creator. Amra, Hay Adam da'at bai lemivre. This person, this Adam Arishon, that you are prepared now to create, Zamin hu la'gaza kamach. We know that he is in the future going to create problems in the world and therefore arouse the wrath within you. And if you do not extend your wrath, meaning if you don't immediately provide the retribution and punishment, if you don't desist from that kind of attitude, Tavle galoyit varei. It's better that he should never be born because he's going to sin. So why create him in the first place? And then you've got to go through the scenes of a Holocaust and the destruction of a temple. I mean, these are people that are prone to sin. You're going to have to create conditions by which you'll wipe them out. So why start the procedure in the first place? This is what the Torah was asking the Creator. Amale kutsha bricho, v'chi lemigna it karina erech apayim. You then think that for no purpose am I considered to be the erech apayim. In other words, I extend my wrath. I do not immediately subject people to it, but hold it in abeyance. Elakula ba'oraita itvarei. Everything was created with the Torah. V'kula ba'oraita ishtachlel. And everything is included. That whole universe that we see out there, can you imagine, is included in that Torah that that some of us read into on the Shabbat. You imagine? I thought the Torah was contained in this room. Now the Zohar is trying to convince us that the whole world and the whole universe is contained in the Torah. Does that sound rational? Does it sound logical? But that's what the Zohar says. Began the Adlo Barakucha Berichu Alma, because until the Creator, before the Creator created the world, Ashtian Kol Asvin Kamei. All of the letters, those letters that we find in the Torah, came before the Creator. Valu Kol Chad V'Chad Lemefreya. And that we'll see in the power of the alphabet, which we don't want to discuss. But in any event, the entire universe was created by virtue of the Hebrew letters. Therefore, if the Hebrew letters represent the seed of creation, So they are inclusive of the creation, because we know the seed of a tree contains the entire tree. True only in force form, only in potential form, but it contains everything, because where does the root come from, the trunk and the flowers and the branches, where they all come from? From the seed. So if the seed is the instrument by which the tree is created, and if the entire universe and all of the universes and galaxies are created by the letters, then obviously right here in this room, in that Sefer Torah, we have the whole universe at our fingertips. Now, maybe Rabbi Shimon has gone berserk or out of his mind, but are there many of us here prepared to believe that the entire universe is right there in the Bet HaKnesset on Shabbat, open for all of us to control? Because if we connect with the letters, we in essence have taken control of a good part of this universe, because those letters actually control the universe. Why do they control the universe? Because they are the instruments by which the universe came about in the first place. If this is the case, the way Rabbi Shimon hopes to provide us with this insight, we then can begin to understand why, from a Kabbalistic point of view, man, who appears to be in total disarray with the universe, seems to have no control over his environment, seems to contradict that which the Zohar has just provided us with, in saying that the letters have controlled the universe. And if I can control the letters, as Rabbi Shimon states throughout the Zohar, and provides us with the combinations of those letters by which I can control, let's say, for instance, this month is Capricorn. And if I know the letter, and I know how to meditate with that letter, and some other prayers that are only for the purpose not of being a pious individual, but for improving the well-being of me, not the well-being of the Creator, because insofar as I'm concerned, I am in total agreement with the Zohar. The Creator doesn't need any of my personal help. He seems to be able to manage without me. Then you might ask, then how does the universe appear to us as it does, in such disarray? The answer is, just as man can control this entire universe, and just as man can make use of the universe and all of the forces in the universe to enhance his own life, so does man have the same opportunity and decision-making to create disarray. So it's not the Creator who is providing this kind of abnormal universe we live in, but rather it is through man's own particular actions that everything we see before us has come about. To understand the story of the sale of Joseph and his reaction to his brothers, that Torah that we are discussing has two parts to it. For those of you who have observed the Torah, it has the parchment and it has the letters. Ask, I guess, 99% of Jews, which part of that Torah is more important? Which weighs heavier in value over the other? The usual answer would be, of course, the letters. However, the Zohar says, no. The parchment is the power. The letters are merely the channels by which the power of the parchment becomes expressed. The cloth. The klaf is more important, as it is known, or the letters? The Zohar says no. The parchment. But the letters, you see, make manifest, like thoughts become manifest through words. So the force of the parchment, and why it's parchment I won't go into, why the Torah was chosen to be on parchment, not on paper, not on cloth or any other fabric. No, it must be the skin of an animal, a kosher animal, in fact. There are reasons for that too, but that's not what we're discussing. What we are discussing is that within that Torah there are two parts. There is the physical expression observed by the letters, and then there is the cloth, the parchment. Just as in that Torah, there are two aspects: the metaphysical, the all-powerful energy system of the entire universe, which became manifested through the letters, through those letters. The cloth contains all of that energy of the entire universe. You imagine I'm dealing with every planet right here in the Bet HaKnesset. I'm dealing with the action is right here. And what does it say? That everything, including man, was created by these letters. Therefore, it only follows that man himself has two parts to himself. And we know that. Some call it the soul and the body. Others call it that internal metaphysical part, the thing that makes my hand move up and down, because the hand itself does not make any decisions, but something internally, a force internally, which makes it rise up or rise down. There are two parts, two essential parts. Unfortunately, we are not always in control of both parts. We are not always in control of both parts. What do I mean we're not always in control of both parts? Sometimes we get angry. Sometimes we become depressed. One moment later, we can be in full ecstasy. We're schizophrenic all the time. The only difference between those that are locked up and we people outside is we somehow manage to deal with other people around us. But if we couldn't deal with them, we would be classified as schizophrenics, because in our behavior, for most people daily, everyone acts in a very strange way. Today he's up, tomorrow he's down, or this hour he's up, the next hour he's down. What do you call that? Not two parts to a person? I mean, is that a normal person? I'm not talking about someone who behaves irrationally. I'm talking about most people who are considered to be normal people, yet have their ups and downs within a day. And that's perfectly normal. But is it perfectly normal for one to be high and then be low a moment later? But there are absolutely two parts to ourselves. That's what creates the ups and downs and so forth. Because we are not in total control of our total self, which consists of two parts: the physical and the metaphysical. When we discuss Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, because they are chariots, we again are discussing two aspects. The physical, as we said before, these people were physical people. However, there was a metaphysical part that had complete access to the cosmos, complete access to all that is and will be. But then you might raise the question, is tomorrow now? Is tomorrow now? Well, what comes first, today or tomorrow? The obvious answer is, of course, today. Then we know that everything that is today, or everything that is now, everything that is first, and everything that is a cause already includes that which follows. Therefore, we have to assume, whether we want to think about this point or not is unimportant, but no one can deny the fact that tomorrow must be here now. Because if today comes before tomorrow, then tomorrow is already here. Because today is the cause for tomorrow. Tomorrow didn't start by itself, just like a seed contains it all. Maybe we can't see it all when we observe the seed, but is the tree here now? Of course it is. So when we discuss chariots, when we discuss Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, what are we discussing? We are discussing people that while they were very much physical and connected to this physical realm, nevertheless, in a parallel universe, which exists in every individual, you know that metaphysical part of us, the thing we can't connect with, the thing we sometimes say, I don't know why I'm doing this, and I don't know why I feel this way, and I don't know, and I don't know, and I don't know. You hear more times, listen to yourself, more times during the day, you'll hear the word, I don't know, more than I do know. That goes to show you how much we're really in touch with ourselves. But the chariots, and what do we mean by chariots? These were people who were born initially, at the very outset, with a total connection to the cosmos, which means they were connected with today, yesterday, and tomorrow, and never lost that contact, That's what, because they were abode of consciousness. What they had acquired was not something that came through experience, through study, through prayer, through other mediums. They were simply born that way, to be totally connected with the metaphysical, with that total cosmic consciousness, and to be connected to this world of Malchut, the world of mud. They could be in both places at the same time. Both places at the same time. When the brothers sold Joseph, when they sold Joseph, the Zohar declares that these 10 brothers were chariots. They were chariots. They were chariots of the 12 signs of the zodiac. Each son represented a control over one particular sign of the zodiac. That means that when the Zohar tells us and states that they are chariots, he immediately provides us with a clue as to what's really going on. Not what we read, but something far deeper than what appears in this superficial tale about the sale of Joseph. These are abode of consciousness people. These are chariots, which means they can live in both places at the same time and not be affected, and not go up and down with the climate, with the weather, and with conditions, and with daily environmental problems. They were constant in both channels, being connected to the world of Malchut, that butts place, as I say it in Hebrew, or Malchut, where the troubles are, the illusionary problems, and also on a metaphysical level. And because they were abode of consciousness, and because they had total intelligence, that might even raise the question even further. So with such intelligence, and we're not getting away from that. They are chariots, and that's why we raise the question initially. How could they sell their brothers when they were of such high spiritual consciousness, so connected? How could we, simple people, rarely would ever dream of selling our brother? For what reason? Because Joseph told them of a dream he had. He didn't really do anything to them. He told them of a dream he had. And that dream said, you're going to bow down to me. But it was only a dream. He didn't make them bow down to him. He didn't behave with them in a matter of zilzul, of degradation. He just told them a dream. And therefore you go sell your brother. So obviously the tale has to be washed aside. We can't treat the tale as it is. It has no meaning as it is. Then what was What was happening here? First, to provide us with an essence that a human being who has no control can be a Jekyll and Hyde. Is that right? We believe that. We believe people can behave one way and an opposite way tomorrow. But these were conscious people, and they were operating on two levels, two parallel universes. On the one level, they were the chariots of the constellations. But on another level, that physical part of them, they could look down and they knew, because they were chariots of the constellations, what lied within the stars. What was in the stars? They saw the picture. They saw the picture. They saw the end result. That end result was what? That there would have to be bondage in Egypt, because there were certain souls, as the Zohar explains, those souls that were during the time of the flood, failed in the job and came back again in the Tower of Babel, failed again in their tikkun process, and would again have to come down. And they would have to go through the suffering so as to create a circumstance for tikkun. And therefore bondage was necessary. The same way as the Holocaust was not man-made, neither was it God-made. It was a tikkun process. It was already seen before the action took place. It's like today we can observe a movie about World War II. You see the action as if it's happening today. But if the caption says 1943, you know it's a World War II picture. You see the action before you, but it's not taking place now. The same way as when it did happen, and it did take place, that film was produced long before the actual production of the film. The actual Holocaust was already in production before it appeared on the screen of world history. Does that mean that there were producers of this play called the Holocaust? And I know there are many, many plays on the Holocaust and many movies on the Holocaust. I'm merely presenting now a different one entirely, something that I might even be condemned by some people. But that this production was already in film before it appeared. You know, like if you've ever been to Universal Studios and you see the way they prepare films, when you finally see the movie on the screen, it's gone through a whole process long before it makes its appearance. It is no different than the skyscrapers that we observe today. It would be only a fool who assumed that there was no planning. There was no thought that went into the production of this skyscraper. Skyscraper is the finished product, the end product, the end result of things already that had taken place before. Not only on the drawing boards of the architect, not only in the thought of the individual, but many other factors that may have even arisen long before it appeared on the drawing board. So many things happen before that building appears. Because human activity, as the Zohar says, is what creates the movie in this world. So if I'm bad today, and let's say most of us are bad today, the end result is what? So much negative cosmic energy. The end result is a Holocaust. The Holocaust is merely the result of prior action, because man is in total control of the universe. Whether he produces a picture of harmony or whether he produces a picture of Holocaust depends on human activity. The 10 sons in the sale of Joseph, They knew very well what was happening when they sold Joseph. But the tale doesn't appear so. The tale appears as if they're conspiring and that they themselves are doing all this. The answer is no. The answer is no. Because if we can redirect our own thinking into understanding that it is only a fool that begins to build a building of 68 stories without a plan, without an architect, and without getting the evaluation of whether the land can hold this building or not, that's a fool. So everything is in the planning stages long before it appears. It is only a fool that can observe a physical Holocaust. It is only a fool that can observe the physical temple, destruction of the temple, and say, look what the Romans did. That's not what the Talmud says. The Talmud says it is not the Romans that destroyed the temple. It was the Jew who destroyed the temple. You mean the Jew took torches and lit the holy temple? No, the Talmud doesn't say that. The Talmud says because of their inhuman behavior amongst themselves, that brought about the inevitable result. Negative human activity on the part of the Jew, that brought about the end result called the destruction of the temple. That's not what we mourn. Maybe some people are told that's what the mourning is all about, but that's not what Tisha B'Av is about. Tisha B'Av is the mourning of the way human beings could conduct and behave between themselves. That's what we mourn on Tisha B'Av, not the destruction of the temple, because I've got a secret for you. According to the Zohar and according to the Ari, the Romans never burnt the temple. It's still here. Can you imagine? Now, if that's what they claim, and they are people with, I believe, proper credentials, that the temple still exists. It was not destroyed. So what are they mourning for on Tet B'Av? What's the mourning all about? The mourning is because inhuman behavior. So when the brother sold Joseph, it was not with malice. But then you might say, but it says they hated him. Doesn't it say that in Vayeshev, in Miketz? I'm sorry, Vayeshev. You know, how am I going to explain away Vayisnu Oto in chapter 37, verse 4? Vayisnu Oto. And the corruption of the translation is they hated him. I can't buy that. I cannot feasibly conceive that people who are chariots, people who represented the totality of control of the cosmos, would lower themselves to an act that probably all of us here would never dream about. And yet they, in their conscience, could sell their brother, and then the Torah says they hated him. Along comes the Zohar and says, never accept that corrupt translation. Because there is no aspect of hatred within a chariot. So what does it mean by Yisnu also? It means another concept. Hatred, the word hatred means by Yisnu Oto, there was no connection between the two. There was no connection. What does it mean there were no connection? For those of you who know what Joseph represented, and for those of you who know what the other brothers represented, briefly stated, because I don't want to discuss the Sfirot, Joseph represented that cosmic consciousness of Yesod, of Zeir Anpin. The other brothers were in the realm of Malchut, because I refer back to the marriage of Yaakov and Leah. And you know what it says? Yaakov hated Leah. Again, are we going to drag this chariot called Jacob down into the gutter and say he hated? If Jacob can hate, then why should there have ever been included within Leviticus, Vayikra, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. If Yaakov's the example that we're permitted to hate, then why should I be told through a mitzvah that v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha? How is that possible? Yaakov could hate. Then it is demanded of me to love if Yaakov can hate. So the word vayisnu oto there was never an implication, or the pasuk never implied there was hatred. There was no hatred. There was this difference of realms, differences of what? Of grades. You know that between us, we have certain friends. There are certain friends, people that we don't want to associate. Does that mean we hate them? No, we do not find that common denominator that can bring the two of us together. Yosef was one denomination, and his brothers were. Yaakov, before he became Yisrael, before he was elevated to an upper elevation of consciousness, was on the realm of Rachel. That's why he loved Rachel. Once he was elevated to Yisrael, to another level of consciousness, he just lost touch with that world. He was now in another realm, the realm of Leah. But hating, perish that thought. Therefore, when the brothers who were chariots saw tomorrow, because if they're chariots, that means that tomorrow for them is here now. When you're connected on that level of cosmic consciousness, which we on every Shabbat are attempting to do. You mean to say chariots were not there? They saw tomorrow. They knew that all of those souls that were destined to come down, who were reincarnations of the Dor HaMabul, of the flood, the deluge, and of the Tower of Babel, these people have to return again. And they were going to have to be in bondage in Egypt. This was the procedure. This was the Malchut procedure. This was the physical reality procedure. This was inevitable. And therefore, the process was by the sale of Joseph. But it was not out of malice. It was not out of hatred. But this was the process of what? Of Malchut. Because they could be here and there at the same time. They could look down and see what Malchut was going to be. Therefore, when we have discussed this aspect of how did Joseph think of not meeting his brothers, and his father should not be informed that he's alive, and then even telling his father, come down to Egypt. Joseph, that's your father. Rush at the first opportunity. Say hello to him after 17 years. Go back. Just let him know you're alive. He didn't go back. Why? Why did he go back? Why was the show going to appear this way? The answer lies in the same explanation we've given for the sale of Joseph.
They had the authority to change things?
Absolutely. But they were chariots in robotic consciousness, meaning they were part of the system, of the celestial system. They were chariots, which means channels for the way mankind was to evolve and emanate, and the way tikkuns were to happen. These were not people like ourselves. They were immediately born, as it says, Moshe. Vayaki Tov. She saw that he was good. What does it mean? What does it mean? He was in another sphere of consciousness when he was born. So says the Ari about Rabbi Shimon. What is the greatness of Rabbi Shimon? I even marvel how people are not hungry just to connect with a man like this. Why was he so great? Why was he so great, Rabbi Shimon? That it says that the generation of Rabbi Shimon will never appear again until the age of Aquarius, which we are fortunate to be included within this age of Aquarius. There will never be a generation like the generation of Rabbi Shimon. So it says, because Rabbi Shimon was born with the Or Makif at the same time that he was born with the Or Pnimi, which means he was born with a total consciousness. In other words, it takes us maybe 20 years, 50 years, 80 years to acquire intelligence, knowledge, and everything else. Rabbi Shimon was born with it. The day he was born, he acquired all that knowledge. The knowledge of tomorrow, the knowledge of yesterday, etc. That's how he could write the Zohar, because he was totally inclusive of all of that knowledge. And the Zohar is inclusive of every knowledge necessary to understand the entire cosmos. That was the power of Rabbi Shimon. He was not a normal human being.
But he didn't have any authority to change the...
Oh, then you forgot to read Kabbalah for the layman, or you did read the Kabbalah for the layman, when the angel of destruction came down and said...
Tisha B'Av.
No.
What was it?
Why didn't he prevent Tisha B'Av, you can ask?
Lag BaOmer.
Lag BaOmer.
Was it Lag BaOmer?
Yeah.
That what?
Lag BaOmer.
He
No,
went on
Tisha B'Av.
No, but Arav is talking
Did
about
he-
something else.
I'm saying, did but he never utilized his powers to change the cause of...
The same way as the brothers did not utilize their power
But they did.
to prevent. No, on the contrary,
Oh,
they
they
played
didn't
out the
prevent.
scene.
They
They
didn't
didn't prevent.
prevent.
Because you cannot interfere in all of those souls tikkun that
But they went and sold their brother, which means that they actually did something that they could have not do.
by selling him, right?
Yeah,
we
by
know that
selling.
we know that they in fact were even punished. Supposedly, they were reincarnated in the 10 Asara Haruge Malchut. These 10 sons, right, were incarnated in the 10 giants, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol, 10 other people who were inhumanely,
So they did
Destroyed.
get punished for it.
so they were punished. The answer is, and the question is, because the question and answer comes at the same time, chariots. You can't get closer to God than a chariot. Are they going to pay the price for selling their brother? We've just got finished saying that they could not be within that kind of consciousness.
But here is the point that I once mentioned to you, the Matara Mekadesh Tetemtzeim.
Never.
Right, but here they did something.
Never.
But they did something like that here.
What did they do here?
They knew that we supposed to all come to Egypt. Therefore,
That's right.
they sold their brother.
Which level were they referring to at that point? The Malchut level.
Yes,
Because that was a necessary part
right.
of Tikkun for all
But
of those.
The general aim was to bring everybody to Egypt.
That's right. And they
That
were
is the
merely
Matara-
channels.
That's the Matara Mekadesh
That-
Tetemtzeim.
You mean the sale itself?
Yes.
The sale itself was bad.
But that was,
The-
in other
but the
words,
sale was what? The sale was on the physical level.
yes.
Where was Joseph? He was in Egypt, or was he in Zaire and Pin, in Yesod, the Sfirat Yesod? Where was Joseph? In Mitzrayim, or was he there?
Physical Mitzrayim.
The physical Mitzrayim and the physical Joseph was here.
I'm talking about the physical part.
That's right. Because that part of the physicality was part of the movie. Part of bondage.
Okay, well, in the same token, I'm saying that if a person...
But the 99% of Yosef was where? In Israel. Or maybe up in heaven. His consciousness was elsewhere. That's why I wanted to make this point of 99.
The differentiation here. Does it mean that it was okay for them because they were chariots versus somebody who's not a
Never.
chariot?
No. That's why we also learn.
I mean, let's
I see
take an
it's a
ordinary
very subtle
person
point. No, an ordinary person
Who would
is
do
living
the same
in
thing, but he's
Malchut.
not a chariot.
No, he is totally to be condemned for what he did. The Torah says if you sell somebody, the punishment
No,
is
for the purpose,
death.
for a good cause.
Death. No, death. Good, bad, or indifferent. The Torah does not designate for what purpose. You sell somebody, the punishment is death. The punishment for physical Yosef was death.
So
was
there's-
death.
So there was the same judgment for both.
But the point that we're discussing, but the 99%, we're asking, how could somebody of the nature of Yosef think of selling? And the answer is this: there were two separate, distinct parts. That's why I brought this little preface about schizophrenic, right? The trouble is that for most of us, we live in both places at the same time. We do not differentiate, right?
But if my aim is to do good, my spiritual aim is to do good and save somebody.
If the means is bad, as prescribed, let's say in the Torah,
Yes.
then the matara is never mekadesh
Et Emtsai.
et emtsai. Never. That is the fallacy, because the emtsai is already the matara. In Kabbalah, that's because we're living now 80 years, 120 years, right? In this period. Is that the end and beginning of the soul? Of our souls? No. There was a beginning, and there will be a continuation. So this part is what? The matara? Or the matara's tomorrow after death? Where is the matara? There's no such thing as end. Therefore, the end never justifies the means, because what is end? No one can ever determine what end is. So
But they could.
they could. That's right. Only when there was a total connection with the 99% of the universe. Only then. For most of us who are not connected to this 99%, because we are not chariots, therefore we have to live in this mundane world.
In other words, whatever is good for the goose is not
We'll
good
have a
for the
break
gander.
for about 5 to 10 minutes.
Do you mean by this that there could have been another